1297. A kingdom under occupation, an army outnumbered and outgunned, and a single bridge that would change the fate of an entire nation. Today, we tell the story of how William Wallace and Andrew Moray, with no king and no reinforcements, engineered one of the greatest reversals in medieval warfare, a battle that turned Scotland's fight for freedom from the brink of collapse into a legend that still echoes through history. In the late 1290s, Scotland was a kingdom in turmoil. After years of dynastic crisis, invasion, and the crushing defeat at Dunbar in 1296, King Edward I of England occupied the land and deposed Scotland's king, John Balliol. English sheriffs, taxes, and garrisons stretched across the country, but not all Scots were ready to accept foreign rule. Resistance flickered into life in every corner of the realm. In the north, Andrew Moray rekindled revolt, liberating towns and castles from English authority. In the southern uplands, William Wallace, a charismatic warrior of humble origins, gathered followers with hit-and-run raids that struck fear into the occupiers. By early autumn of 1297, these two rebels had mustered forces and marched toward the strategic town of Stirling, the gateway to the Scottish Highlands. Stirling wasn't just another town, it was the key to Scotland. Straddling the River Forth, it controlled the natural corridor between north and south. And at its heart stood a narrow wooden bridge, barely 2 horsemen wide, the only practical crossing for a large army. Whoever controlled this bridge could decide the fate of an entire campaign. Wallace and Moray chose to make their stand on Abbey Craig, a steep hill overlooking the bridge and the river plain. It was a perfect vantage point. Marshy grounds stretched in front of them. The river protected one flank, and behind them lay the promise of freedom. Across the river, the English army assembled, commanded by John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, and accompanied by Hugh de Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland. They numbered far more than the Scots, perhaps as many as 9,000 men compared to the Scots' 5,000 to 6,000. Yet numbers alone would not decide this day. Surrey knew the bridge was a choke point. Crossing thousands of men over its narrow planks would take hours, and leave any force painfully exposed. Even so, despite offers from his own officers to find a ford upstream, the English commander bowed to brute confidence and pressed forward. Cressingham, scornful of the rebels, urged immediate action. In a fateful decision, Surrey allowed the advance to begin. For hours, English troops trickled across the bridge, a few infantry, then a handful of heavily armored cavalry. Wallace and Moray held their line, waiting, watching every exhausted soldier struggle over the span. Then, at the perfect moment, when just enough of the enemy had crossed but not enough to support each other, the Scots sprung their trap. From the high ground of Abbey Craig, Scottish spearmen and archers surged forward in tightly packed schiltrons, driving down the muddy ground toward the isolated English vanguard. The bridge became a death trap. English troops were cut off from reinforcements, forced back toward the river, and crushed between the Scots' attacking front and the raging current behind them. As panic spread, the English attempts to retreat only worsened the carnage. Horses and armored soldiers crowded the narrow bridge, pushing and shoving, turning it into a bottleneck from which there was no escape. Some accounts suggest the timber groaned and broke under the weight, sending many men and beasts plummeting into the icy river below. The isolated English units were systematically destroyed. Cressingham himself was slain in the melee. Legend, perhaps apocryphal but revealing of the Scots' fury, later claimed his skin was flayed and fashioned into a sword belt, a gruesome symbol of Scottish vengeance. By the end of the day, the English army was shattered. Chroniclers recorded staggering losses, possibly thousands killed, with only fragments escaping south. Scottish casualties were low by comparison, although Andrew Moray himself was mortally wounded and would die later that year. In the aftermath, Wallace and Moray were declared guardians of Scotland by their fellow countrymen, effectively becoming the leaders of a nation rising from occupation. Freedom, once a distant dream, now seemed within grasp. The Battle of Stirling Bridge was more than a tactical triumph. It was symbolic. It proved that strategy, terrain mastery, and resolve could overcome brute force and superior numbers. It rekindled Scottish hopes of independence and cemented William Wallace's place in history. Yet the war was far from over. Edward I would return with a larger army in 1298, defeating Wallace at Falkirk. Still, the myth forged at Stirling, that Scotland could stand and fight, endured, laying the groundwork for future generations.